Okay guys, welcome back, and let's have a look at the payroll cycle class example. So we're going to read through the example just like we did with the other ones, and then we're going to analyze it and critically look at it for a little bit. We're then going to go to the whiteboard and we're going to start discussing it as a class together. Remember, there is no model answer for this class example, so we want to try and develop it as we go. Okay, so the class example reads: you are an audit manager at Rent a Space Limited. While reviewing the audit file, you have come across the following audit working paper. Okay, so on the first statement tells you're an audit manager. That means you're going to be reviewing, you're going to be giving guidance, you're going to be looking at it from a high level perspective, and you're also going to be attempting to correct the trainees' thinking, right? So you need to be the expert now as you approach this, particularly looking at it from a holistic point of view. Okay, so that's what we want to focus on when we're dealing with this particular case. It then says you Rent a Space Limited. Now, Rent a Space Limited makes us think that it's a limited company. It's a public company, which means the four things always come up. Remember, when we talk about public companies, always four things come up: Companies Act, King 4. We also have CPC, because remember, public companies have to have a chartered accountant signing off on the financial statements. So CPC, or Code of Professional Conduct, comes up. And then finally, they have to be audited by an external auditor, which means AP Act also needs to come up. So these are the four things we need to start thinking about whenever we see limited in our test and exam questions. Next sentence: the audit trainee is still busy with the payroll and personnel section of the audit file, but you quickly take a look at the work that has been done. Okay, so the working paper is not complete from what we're being told here. Okay, so the working paper is not complete. You need to keep that in mind. Okay, so Rent a Space Limited is the client. Year end. Okay, so it's still very early in the audit, right? Because the year end is only the 31st of October. Physical verification of employees. Okay, cool. So we know what physical verification of employees is. It's where you contact a specific employee, you ask them to come forward as the auditor, you inspect things like their pay slip, you inspect things like their identity card. You want to make sure that the employee exists, it's a valid employee, and they do the job that they're supposed to be doing. So for example, you might ask them, what is your job title? What exactly do you do in the business? You might also want to have a look at their leave days, okay, because that's another area of focus. So we want to look at their leave days and try and understand how many leave days are owing to them. It helps us in our testing of the leave day provision. So we'll do that. We'd look at their pay slip, we'd look at their file and confirm certain things like, when was the last time you took leave? And then they'll tell us, I took leave last week Monday. So then you go and have a look at the employee file to make sure it's been accurately recorded. So these are the things we do in a employee verification. It is a critical part of the payroll and personnel cycle, because it really pulls together the HR and the payroll part. Because remember, payroll only deals with paying people. HR or personnel deal with employment and policies, etc. So when we actually contact the person and ask them about how much they're getting paid, when do they get paid, do they get paid regularly, what is their leave, and then we also say, when last did you take leave, when last did you receive a promotion, what is your job title, how long have you been at the firm, then you're also testing the HR side. So you're testing, it's quite a strong test, a personnel verification. Okay, so we know what we're looking for as remember, we're the audit manager, so we know what we're looking for now. So let's have a look. So we've got Erin Keys, Lala Zuma, and that person. Employee verified, yes. So immediately when I see that, I get concerned as an audit manager, because when an audit trainee is not picking up any errors, I don't know if they're doing their work properly. Okay, so anyway, let's have a look at the notes. So it says, so Erin Keys, right? Okay. The audit team telephonically spoke to this employee. Ooh, big problems. Is a telephonic conversation a physical verification? And the answer is no. A telephonic conversation is a telephonic verification. There's a very big difference. So he's labeled it physical verification, but he's done a telephonic verification. So that's the first point. Okay. However, the audit, I think this is meant to be audit team. The audit team was not able to physically meet with this employee in person. Okay, right? Okay. Instead, a letter was received from the employee addressed to the audit team, in which the employee explained who she was and how long she had worked at Renter Space Limited. So from our perspective, this is not a physical verification. Okay, I just want to say that. So let's look at the next person. This employee works at the Pietermaritzburg branch of Renter Space. As a result, the audit team could not physically verify this employee. However, the financial manager was visiting the Pietermaritzburg branch during the audit. Thus, the audit team requested that the financial manager inspect this employee on their behalf. Okay, so the financial manager is actually an employee of the client, of our audit client. So we're asking our audit client to do our audit work, which is now a major issue, right? Because then it's not work that is generated by the auditor. It's work generated by the audit client, which we know has the least persuasive audit evidence is stuff generated by the audit client. Okay, remember, the most persuasive is audit evidence generated by the auditor, and the least persuasive is audit evidence generated by the audit client. So we've gone from what would have been a very strong test to now what is a very weak test, because we've got the audit manager to do the audit work for us. But let's read, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so it says, upon his return from Pietermaritzburg, the audit team discussed with the financial manager. It was confirmed that this employee existed, and they obtained photographic evidence that this employee was at the Pietermaritzburg branch. Okay, so again, really not happy with the way this work has been done. It's not a physical verification. Photographic evidence does not tell us about, time, place. Okay, well, it tells us place because it says he was photographed in front of the branch. But this photo could have been taken, years or months ago, and this employee may not exist currently. Also, how sure are we that the employee that's in the photograph is the same employee that's on the file? We don't have things like the ID number in the photograph. We don't have things like, the job description and the years that they've been in service, etc. So it's not strong enough evidence. Also, the fact that we've gotten it from the financial manager makes it even more scary, because if the financial manager was attempting to collude and create fictitious employees, it sort of sounds like he would want to, manage the verification of this fictitious employee. So I'm just concerned about that. Okay, so the third person is Zuma. It says this employee was physically verified on the 3rd of November 2020. However, the employee indicated that they were only employed on the 2nd of November 2020. Now we know that the year end is 31st October. This person was employed after year end, so this person should not be in the records. This explanation was accepted by the audit team and found to be reasonable. Okay, so we're not happy with that. because that's after year end. So there's a cutoff issue there. Okay. So the last one, it says this employee could not be verified as the employee was not found at renter space branches throughout the country. After further audit procedures and a discussion with the human resource manager, it was ascertained that this employee's contract was terminated on the 1st of August 2020. And we are busy auditing end of October 2020. So the accounts are not up to date, right? The human resource manager indicated that the salary that this employee receives is not material for audit purposes. Okay, so why is the human resource manager telling us as auditors what is material and not material? We'll make that determination, okay? That's my first instinct, and it might sound a bit harsh, but I feel strongly that audit clients should not be dictating to auditors. But anyway, therefore, no change will be made in the financial statements for the current year. So, a verification of an employee is not only a substantive test. So the audit human resource manager here is mistaken because they believe that we only substantive testing. Part of the employee verification is also a test of control. We're testing the controls around employment, hiring, termination. We're testing the controls around record keeping, as well as leave keeping and payroll. So it's not just substantive testing. So from a substantive viewpoint, yes, this employee's salary is probably going to be immaterial, and so is every employee's salary really in a firm going to be immaterial, except maybe for the CEO. So yes, I accept that it is immaterial probably for audit purposes, but it's a control deficiency. It indicates that there is an error in the control here. So the controls are not being applied. The database of employees are not being updated timeously. So we want to just be aware of that. However, it says the changes will be effected for 2021 financial year. The personnel database was inspected after year end. Okay, so on the 3rd of November, to confirm that this change was made and will be effective in 2021. Oh, so they're saying the audit work, they perform the audit work of going and having a look at the database after year end to make sure that it's updated. But we're auditing 2020, we're not auditing 2021 yet. So we need to focus on 2020. I'm happy that they looked and made sure that the change was effected, but it doesn't decrease my anxiety around this matter. So in the next few seconds, we are going to go onto the whiteboard. Okay guys, so welcome back, and now we are actually going to be talking about the required. As you can see, the required there asks you to indicate your concerns with regard to the audit that has been performed by the trainee. So here you are meant to be giving advice and assisting the trainee. Let's start off then and discuss it in a methodical way. So we'll actually start with note 1, and maybe then we'll discuss them under subheadings of the different notes. This is a key thing that we need to look at when we are trying to set out our different answers, is we must have some sort of way of delineating it to the marker in a very easy and understandable way. So let's say with regard to note 1, and then with regard to note 2 and 3 going down. So you would remember in note 1, this was where we had the telephone conversation. So I think it's important for us to note that it wasn't a physical verification. The employee was not physically verified, and as a result, it really shouldn't be considered audit evidence for our purposes in this audit working paper. So the trainee had a telephonic conversation with the person, and that person on the other side of the line could have really been anyone. Not to say that it necessarily was the actual employee that we're looking for. So that's where our problem comes up. There wasn't any sort of way or any sort of indication that this is the exact person that we're looking for. And I think there is where we need to place our focus, because we weren't able, for example, to look at their ID. We weren't able to get important documents like their pay slip, or their leave balances, etc. So we won't be able to actually gain any information here with regard to the testing of the payroll or with regard to the testing of the HR cycle. So I think it's important for us to note that first as a concern, that we did not get this important information, like, what is the job description, or what is the pay slip, what are the remaining leave days. So we must note that down as what really our concerns are. And I think we can also indicate that the letter that was received after the telephone call could also have easily been doctored or been changed by, let's say, someone who was attempting to perpetrate fraud. So the letter, yes, it's a secondary way of getting information, and so it does add a little bit of value to the individual phone call, but this method of communication is just far too easy for someone to fraudulently change. So and fraudulently there is spelled FRAUD. So we just want to make sure that we make that known, that we don't trust such sort of communication in the form of a letter, because it can actually be amended. And then so we've taken what would have been a very strong test, that being the actual verification of the employee, and we've impaired the reliability of this test by performing the procedures incorrectly. So we want to make that known, that this type of work that the audit trainee has done has actually negatively affected our audit evidence. So we don't want that to go unnoticed. We want the audit trainee to understand that there is going to need to be more work done because of the various loopholes that the trainee has left for things like manipulation and fraudulent behavior. The test, as indicated previously, was a robust test, that of auditor generated information, but because we have not done the test correctly, we can't really consider it to be auditor generated information. But we're going to get into that actually in note 2 in more detail. So I'll leave that discussion for then. So now, with regard to the second note, remember what happened here was the audit manager was going to visit the Pietermaritzburg branch, and we then requested that the audit manager maybe just collect our audit evidence on our behalf. So the audit manager was requested to do the audit work for us. And this is where we've taken again a robust test, which was a test that would have resulted in the auditor producing audit evidence, and we have now watered it down and changed it so that the audit evidence that we have obtained is not as robust as it used to be. You know that the most robust evidence that we can get is audit evidence prepared by the auditor. So now that we're doing it this way, we're decreasing the effectiveness and the robustness of the audit evidence that we're getting. In fact, audit evidence generated by the audit client is amongst the worst audit evidence that an auditor can collect. So when we collect that type of evidence, we are going to be required to actually have compensatory or what's called mitigating evidence. So we need multiple lines of evidence to back that up, because it can't be relied on its own. So that's what I'm saying there. And the next thing that we want to focus in on with regard to the audit client collecting the evidence on our behalf, and why it is bad for us, is that the audit client may have an additional opportunity to limit the audit skepticism that the auditor might have. So, for example, the auditor under normal circumstances would be allowed, to select their own sample and to select the persons that they want to test. Whereas now, when we're handing that job over to the audit client can pre-select or evade or assist in covering up any types of misstatements or any types of errors that they may or may not even be aware of. So you got to remember, the objectives of the audit client and the auditor are not always the same. The auditor wants to find all material misstatements. The audit client does not want that to happen, because then that means more work for him. So even if he might not be aware of a specific error, if he does become aware while he is conducting audit procedures for us, he will then act to try and cover that up and act to try and hide that in some way. So we want to be aware that by giving the auditor or the audit client this power to do our audit work for us, reducing our ability to analyze this with some sort of professional skepticism. The next point I want to cover and look at is the photographic evidence that the audit manager has provided the audit team with. So a photograph, as you know, can have a timestamp and it can have location tracking with modern devices, but that's not necessarily what was indicated in the question. So we can assume that there isn't a timestamp and there isn't any location evidence, because the question goes into detail about where the picture was taken, but it doesn't necessarily indicate when it was taken. So, for example, such pictures can be easily changed or manipulated with the use of software these days to make people appear in a specific place when they're not really there. So we need to make sure that this is understood by the audit trainee, that this, even though it might be considered evidence, it's not robust enough, it's not strong enough for us to accept as audit evidence at this time. There isn't enough details, there isn't enough information given. Now, on the flip side, if the picture was taken by an actual member of the audit team, that totally changes the way the picture would be treated in terms of audit evidence, because the audit team member can testify to the place and the location, the time, etc., that this picture was taken. But when the client has taken it, then we have to treat it with some sort of skepticism and some sort of almost apprehension to accepting this as audit evidence. The next thing is the actual photograph does not give us any information about the things like, the payroll section. What is his ID number? What was his last pay slip? What are his outstanding leave balances? So it really doesn't add too much evidence for us there. So the next matter was dealing with cutoff. You would remember that in the question there was a cutoff issue that had arise, and the actual audit trainee accepted that this was acceptable or accepted it as audit evidence. That is a problem. Number one, it's evidence of a control deficiency. So the records are not being kept up to date, and they're not being reviewed regularly to make sure that they are up to date. The trainee has not raised this as a control deficiency, and the trainee instead simply accepts it and instead puts it in a note. And if we as reviewers are not careful, we might actually miss the fact that this is a hidden audit deficiency that needs to be reported to those charged with governance, and we might, just accept what is being given to us here. So we don't want that to happen, and we don't want the audit trainee to believe that this information is valid and accurate. It's not, and so we want to focus in, and we want to really tell the student that, or tell the trainee that. The next thing is, even though it's a control deficiency on the one hand, it is also an error, because it means that this employee could very well have been included in the calculation of things like payroll, in the calculation of things like, and I think that first point that I've just mentioned actually comes into sharper focus in note 4, but we can have a number of knock-on effects and knock-on errors that could happen. So it could pop up in payroll, it could pop up in leave days, it could pop up elsewhere, or leave day accruals. So we need to basically track this through the accounting records. We need to track the error through the accounting records and look at all the different accounts that it might affect, and identify if any of those effects that it has are material in any way. Okay, so that's, I think, an important section or important thing that we need to consider, is that even though we may feel that we've done enough work on it, there might be additional errors that are hiding. Okay, so now I think we've covered that. Let's move on to the next page, which is where we'll start discussing section 4. So with regard to note 4, here is where the audit client attempted to tell us how to do our audit work, and it's a pet peeve of mine when audit clients actually tell us about what's material and what's not material, whereas we are the experts. We know what's material and what's not material as the auditors. We shouldn't be told this by the audit client. The first thing we want to look at is the fact that this is also a control deficiency. A similar control deficiency to the last one, so we might just raise one control deficiency in the audit file and link these two issues or two instances as evidence. We want the audit trainee here to again do the investigation and find out why this particular thing was not picked up by the audit client, and what really are the controls around making sure that the database of personnel is kept up to date. So I think that's important from our perspective, is we want to be able to understand why this is happening repeatedly from our audit client. The next thing is with regard to this error. Yes, even though it might seem like the salary of this employee is not quantitatively material, the fact that the error was picked up and it is evidence of a deficiency in control is actually qualitatively material, number one. Number two, when you go and look at concluding the audit, which we're going to do in a few weeks, right? So when we analyze concluding the audit, you'll find out that as auditors, we not only take into account material errors, we take into account also what's called immaterial or trivial errors, because as in aggregate, so when we add them all together, in aggregate, there may be a possibility that such errors indicate evidence of some sort of fraud. So for example, our audit client might not make one big journal entry that's fraudulent, but multiple small journal entries that are fraudulent, and push the general accounts in one direction. So even though it's not quantitatively material individually, it might be quantitatively material in aggregate, so we have to list it down, we have to note it down as an error. The next thing is it's qualitatively material because it's evidence of a audit deficiency. The trainee has indicated in their notes that they have done, additional work, right? And often you'll find audit trainees will put something like this in to say to the audit manager and the audit partner, listen, I've covered all the risks. But they actually haven't, because what they've done here is made a critical mistake, and a mistake that often trainees and students will make, is that they have looked for evidence in 2021, right? So the next financial year, to try and gain assurance on the previous financial year. And that's not how it works, because again, we need to deal and understand the concept of cutoff. Cutoff means the correct things are recorded in the correct year. So yes, the audit trainee might seem like they've done additional work, but really the work is not adding value to the audit. So we want to point that out to the audit trainee, that they've incorrectly conducted this work. The next thing is, as an audit manager, one of the things we need to criticize is actually the way in which the work is presented. So if we look at the actual audit working paper, you'll find that the trainee says, yes, this person was verified. And then later on in the note, they say, the person really wasn't verified because they didn't work here, or they haven't been working here, and so as a result couldn't really verify them. That is sneaky, that is dangerous, and that's what audit managers would call phantom ticking. So the audit trainee is attempting to lie to the audit manager and audit partner here. So we need to point that out and make sure that the audit trainee understands that this type of incidents should be listed as no, not verified. The next thing is, just like with note 3, this will have knock-on error effects. So it's going to affect multiple different errors. Multiple different accounts. So it will affect payroll, which will feed into salaries. It will affect leave pay provision. It will affect things like expenses. It will affect things like recruitment. It will affect all of these multiple other expenses. For example, CCA, administration, arbitration costs. If this person particularly took us to CCA, it's going to affect all of those costs because we may not have recorded it accurately. We may not have recorded these costs because we thought that the person is still working here. So we want to do that additional investigation and do that additional work to make sure that we identify all of those errors that may be sitting in the accounts. So next, guys, I want to take a few minutes and I just want to discuss how we need to think out of the box with regard to this actual example. So how can this example be revised, changed, amended to change the way we answer? The first thing is I want you guys to identify and to spot any such tests in other cycles that are similar to verifications. So yes, we are dealing with a verification here, but what about other types of verifications that we do? Do we do any other types of verifications in other audit cycles? Think about that for a second and analyze that and maybe write them down, and then you can apply what you've learned here to other cycles. The next is this question looked very similar to last week's class example, and you would remember that as soon as I read that last week's class example, I said to you guys, it's likely to be a audit procedures question. One could very simply say the same thing about this question. So how are we going to answer this question if that was asked? So I want you to take a few minutes now and re-answer the question based on the fact that it's now asking you to generate audit procedures to assist the trainee. So basically, what if it asks you to correct the trainee by providing them with audit procedures? The next thing is, and this is something often missed in universities, what are the soft skills that are going to be needed? When I say soft skills, I mean interpersonal communication skills. And this is something that students as well as trainees lack, right? So how do you broach this difficult topic when dealing with this particular trainee? Do you come out and say, listen, in the kindest way, but listen, this is not on, you've actually made a mistake here and we need to resolve this? And I think personally that would be my approach. But you need to think about what type of soft skills you need in order to actually tackle this subject with the trainee. It is a sticky and a difficult subject, so we want to think about how we're going to tackle this type of subject. What are the soft skills? What are the tactful skills that we might use when we are actually broaching the subject with the trainee? So like I'm saying there, let's try and think about what is missing in this actual working paper. So for example, elements that are missing in the working paper would be things like, where's the objective, where's the aim of the working paper? We don't necessarily understand the actual audit work that this trainee has done. So we haven't gotten clear view of the audit procedures. It doesn't indicate that the trainee has documented it somewhere in a separate document, and quite frankly that would be silly to document it separately. So those are the things we need to start thinking about. What is missing? What are the holes? How would I improve this working paper? Why do I think that this working paper is not good? And if you need any help about working papers, there is a video up on YouTube. I do know that it is a bit glitchy at times because I was using quite an old camera to shoot that video. But go and have a look at it. Go and review it, and also look at the 2019 test 2, and which is going to be coming up in one of your unseens. So go and have a look at it and analyze that from that perspective, so that you come to an understanding and you come to know what exactly is required out of a working paper. And then, like I said earlier on, I actually jumped the gun, but here I'm just trying to reiterate the fact that this is not the only place that a verification like this is being done. It's actually done in other cycles, and it is an important type of test. So don't necessarily look at employee verifications as a test, look at it as a type of test. Okay, cool guys. So I think we've learned a lot from this specific example. I think the example is a good example. I would like you to go through the example and try and think about it outside of the box, or outside of the audit box, as it were. And if you have any questions regarding the cycle or this particular example, then I hope that you feel free to pop them in the chat. But until next time, thank you for watching.